Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this month's Human Capital Watch. I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Lee Hannell, who is the CHRO of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, as my special guest today. Thank you, Mary Lee, for joining us in what I know is an extremely busy time for you and so many of your colleagues, so thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Well, this morning I thought we would spend some time focusing on some of the ways in which as a community we are looking to get through this collective crisis, and then also hear specifically from a woman who is no stranger to leading through crisis, having spent some time leading the team through the terrorist attacks in 9/11, and now looking at this with a new face of a crisis and some best practices and some thoughts here. So grateful for your participation. And then hopefully we'll share a little bit about some of the support tools we have for you to take advantage of. And then I'd like to open it up for some questions that you may have for either myself or more likely for Mary Lee in particular. You know, we have hundreds of people on this call. We'll try to do this in an orderly and non-chaotic fashion. So we'll open up for questions at the end. So thank you again for joining. And let's take a few moments to talk about where we are. So again, I want to talk a little bit about the support coming from the Human Capital Center of the Conference Board at this time, about some of the curated resources, and we'll speak more in depth about that. As I mentioned, we'll ask Mary Lee for her thoughts, and we'll end with some suggestions and lessons learned that you can take advantage of. You know, like on every webcast that we have, there's an opportunity for you to earn continuing education credits. If you're interested, you see the instructions right there, so please follow along in making sure that you receive those. We've already done the introduction, but I like that picture, Mary Lee. It's very, very nice. It's new. Okay, good.
Yeah, an easygoing picture.
There you go. Mine is official and has pros on it, so it's good. All right. So here's what I'd like to share first and foremost. You know, I think there's no question that this is an unprecedented time, and there are a variety of things that we're doing to support. And let's start with the enterprise-wide TCB approach. You know, we have a reputation at the Conference Board for really two things: for gaining and sharing insights for what's ahead, and also convening the top players in each profession. So across all of TCB, we have a very strong presence in either board governance at this time, or economic forecasts, or modeling, or what to do about crisis communication. So across the entire span of what we have at the Conference Board. And I would encourage you to visit our special hub right off of our main page that will make you aware of the assets and can take advantage of those assets across all of TCB. But in particular, if you visit that website, you'll see this space. And you'll see that you can click through, and it is the curated assets that we have, as well as some of our most recent thinking on human capital. So I just wanted to share this with you and make sure that you're aware of it. What we've done here is to take a look at either our research or that of others we trust and curate them, and then also create many new pieces to try to help in these particular topics. So I hope you will download this presentation. We've tried to make everything hyperlinked so that it's easier for you and everyone's busy, but hopefully these will be the topics that I think all of us are looking at. I know when I was a practitioner and a chief talent officer, when you look at what to do for your people now, what are the ways in which other organizations are looking at not just the immediate care of their employees, but also longer term, and what are the implications for hiring those critical positions you need to. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the broadcast. Right now we have a series of short rapid response reports. You can see the first 7 are posted. They're hyperlinked, takes you right to them. In the coming days we'll have the following 3. Then we're going to move into transition, which is to begin to think about how do we prepare for returning to work? What will that look like? What will be the cadence? Who will be involved? It's just an opportunity for us to put some thoughts in front of you from all of our members that we're speaking with about how they're thinking about it. In fact, this whole Human Capital COVID-19 Hub is the result of the questions that we were asked or the help that was requested, and we were doing it on a one-off basis, and we thought, why not make this available to the community? So that's exactly what we've done. And then after the second phase, which is sort of thinking about returning to work, we'll have another whole slate of rapid response pieces that talk about now that you're in this, an overused term, new normal, next normal, the next normal, whatever that looks like, you know, what should we begin to be thinking about, particularly in the human capital space? So those are the things that are coming, and I hope you'll take advantage of it. And again, the presentation is all hyperlinked after the webcast. So let me just take a couple of moments to set the stage here for the economic work that's been done under the leadership of our chief economist, Bart Van Ark, and his team. And there's some wonderful webcasts and economic modeling and information that has already been posted. It's on that main site, but I want to just touch on two things, particularly as it relates to human capital. So the first one is that in some early work, we asked what people thought would be the impact of COVID-19 on their business. And if you can see that the only response that was at 100% was to get their people to work remotely wherever possible. You can see that on this slide as well, there are many different aspects of the kinds of human capital related elements that you saw, from certainly furloughs and layoffs, also from pay cuts, but also thinking differently around disaster recovery. So this is top of mind for everyone everywhere. And when you think about who's impacted, you can see that roughly 15% of the American workforce has been impacted by this in very, very direct ways. Many of them in the manual services area, where there is more face-to-face customer interactions in a variety of settings, whether that's restaurants or delivery services or childcare. So you can see that the impact is deep, and this sets the stage for what will be a recovery that will look different for other people than perhaps your own organization, and it may be on a different schedule, and it also depends on where you are in the United States. But because we are a global society, these implications will have very far-reaching effects. I think also I would encourage you to think about, sort of the recovery. And I mention this because our economists have done some terrific work in thinking about what might this look like, whether there's a fairly quick recovery, or as you can see, something that doesn't come until the summertime or the fall, or there's a fall recovery with maybe a resurgence. And so each of those has its own economic models. You can see all of that on our website. But when you look at the recovery models, no matter which one will materialize, we are in a different world than we were last year. And so the question then becomes, how do we get back on track? So here's maybe one of the answers, and this is not displaying, and I wish it did. But if it did, you can certainly go to the website, but there is a window on webcast next week, and we have three guests. We have George Barrett, who's the former CEO of Cardinal Health. We have Steve Odland, who is our president and CEO here at the conference board. And we have Bart Van Ark heading our economic work. And this is all about getting the 6 foot away, i.e. social distance economy, back on track. I think you'll really enjoy that. I hope that you will find it illuminating and that you'll register. But there's the link, even if you don't have the life-changing graphic that would have explained what the link does. So with that as a backdrop, let me ask if Mary Lee, you might kind of take us through the very different, in many ways, experience that you have had and some of the things that others could perhaps learn from and benefit from.
Sure, thank you. I'm going to move to this graphic, and I just want to explain a little bit about the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I'm not sure that most people understand the scale of what we do. So you'll see in our graphic, we actually have changed our logo. It talks about air, land, rail, and sea. And that is a great way to sort of summarize what we do. We run the 5 major airport systems, operate them in the New York, New Jersey area, including Kennedy, Newark, LaGuardia, Teterboro, and New York Stewart Airport. We, in terms of land, we're talking about some iconic landmarks like the George Washington Bridge, the Holland and Lincoln Tunnels, the Port Authority Midtown Bus Terminal. Rail is a commuter rail system called PATH that runs between New York and New Jersey that connects on a normal day about 268,000 passengers a day to the New York, New Jersey region. And the seaports are marine terminal operations that have actually been very interesting during this crisis because they've taken on a much different connotation than perhaps we would normally see. You'll see too that while our mission is to keep the region moving, it's been redrafted and crafted specifically to address the COVID-19 pandemic. It really talks about the fact that we are open for business and we are operating, that we are making sure healthcare workers, first responders, frontline workers, many of whom work at the Port Authority, can get to work every single day. And that the supply chains that are so needed in the New York, New Jersey region are alive and healthy, and that we are actually helping to keep those running. So a couple of things I want to talk about, Rebecca, that you asked about, and those were some early challenges that we had in the organization. So this is an organization that is coming on 99 years of history. Our 100th anniversary is next year in April, hoping next year in April will look a lot different than this year in April. That 100 years we have weathered, and I've weathered personally with it, starting with the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, 9/11 in the World Trade Center, which was our headquarters, Superstorm Sandy, hurricanes, and then this COVID-19 disaster. And while there are some lessons we've learned along the way, this one is a lot different than what we've seen in the past. As tragic as 9/11 was, it took but a few days to understand the magnitude and the enormity of the fallout of 9/11 and what that meant to your employees. COVID-19 is a much more long-standing, drawn-out, if you will, event. And so it creates different kinds of challenges for us. So start with the fact that 70% of our workforce at the Port Authority are in the front lines. They are public-facing. They come to work every day. They keep the trains running. They keep the bus terminal open. They keep the airports open for business. And that about only 30% of our workforce is actually working remotely. Our first challenge, however, was really about creating stability across the organization. And the way we did that, because we are a very relationship-based organization, was to create a lot of communication. Now, a large organization, we have 8,000 employees, we have 9,000 retirees. Large organizations like that are not typically well known for keeping communication lines open and vibrant and active. And it was one of the keys, I think, to what we've seen so far in this going very well. So formal agency communication has happened every single day since this started. And for the Port Authority, the way this started was with an announcement by the governor of New York that our executive director was one of the very first people in the region to test positive for COVID-19. That happened on March 7th, and we were off to the races since that time. And so as a result of that formal announcement, 33 of our senior staff, the top levels of the organization, were in quarantine immediately for 2 weeks. And so we had to figure out very, very quickly how to move to action. So formal communications happen every single day in the organization. Those formal communications come from either myself or they come from our executive director and our chairman. But they are not just formal, but they are also personal in that they talk about sort of where we are as an organization and how we can take care of one another. So you'll see a hashtag there that says PA Strong. Their formal communication also happens with our senior leaders who actually personally outreach to a certain number of their employees every day. Our chairman of the board calls 20 people every single day and has done so since the beginning of March to check in on them, on their families, to see how things are going, to see what they need in the front lines as they come in, or what they need as remote workers to continue to be able to be productive and perform. We also are in the business now of telling success stories about how employees are getting the business done and how they're caring for each other as colleagues during this time of crisis. That includes simple things like for our frontline workers out in the aviation world, they needed hand sanitizer stations We couldn't get those stations, so people in our maintenance areas actually built those stations so that every employee had access to hand sanitizers during the workday. Simple things like that that they did to support one another without being asked. And we're trying to tell those stories as they come up each and every day.
Mary Lee, may I just
yeah.
pop in for a second? So there's a
Sure.
question here that you had alluded to the fact that sometimes larger organizations aren't always known for their ability to communicate effectively or quickly. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that. The specific question is, what was the first sign that the Port Authority was willing to communicate differently?
I think it was really about having 33 of the most senior executive staff in lockdown, where they were no longer accessible personally, visibly, during a crisis to their staff. I mean, after 9/11, we rallied and found an alternate space for all of our senior people to come together really quickly so that folks could see us and see that we were okay. We didn't have that ability. And so so that lack of being able to show, for lack of a better way of putting it, that we were okay became really important and became sort of the groundwork of saying we've got to communicate and we've got to do it differently than we've ever done before.
Thank you.
As I said, 60% of our work, 70% of our workers don't sit behind a desk. So having a video chat like this one is very difficult for many of our workers. So we created an alternate website for them to log into, an eNet site of sorts with a password that allows a Port Authority employee who's never had access to this kind of information before have access to what we were putting out on a daily basis. The other thing, I have the benefit of having a chief medical officer who works for us because we have a very robust occupational health group. And the chief medical officer and I actually conducted live informational meetings with employees all over the organization, early, late, and in between, to be able to take live questions from employees who were really concerned. Those questions were not just concerns about the workplace and what we were doing to keep people safe, but also about their families, what it meant for their own world, and how we were going to be able to address that. In this case, the information changed so quickly that literally from one day to another, we were learning something new about the virus, as we all were, and we were pushing that information out in live sessions to employees. We also established a 24/7 hotline in HR. Every available HR person is answering the hotline. We've taken thousands of calls from folks, and the range of questions is: will I get paid for this time? How do I deal with work if I'm home with my kids? What are the new rules? What are the new rules of the road? And just in terms of lessons learned, I think what we all learned is that you really need to be authentic. You have to be a real person. You can't, the formality that we normally present to people is important and it's calming, but what they really want to see is a real person, and how those real people are thinking about the challenging issues and coming to terms with them. I had a conversation with one of the departments on the day that the HSNS Comfort came into New York Harbor. And I paused in the middle of the information session to just tell people what I could see out my window and how amazing that was. Number one, how amazing that was to have the U.S. Comfort come to New York to help, and how troubling at the same time it was that we needed that much help. But I've gotten a lot of emails from employees talking about the fact that they feel like they can connect with a real person, and that has made all the difference. I think too, it's about managing the talk-listening ratio, which is do a lot more listening and a lot less talking than you normally would, because your own employees will tell you what they need and what they want. I think it's also about being willing to act without unnecessary planning. We're an organization that plans way out to the future, you know, what we're doing in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. Right now, planning is not what needs to be done. Action is what needs to be taken. And employees have really benefited greatly, I think, from seeing us take action very, very quickly without thinking it to death. And the last, I think, is to just stay calm. I think people really tune in to watch leaders of the organization engage with employees and be composed and be
I
calm.
think that's critically important because I think, like in every other situation, people look to their leaders to decide whether or not they're going to follow you up that hill. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And here's the hill right in front of us, right? This is, everyone recognizes this. This is really about the change curve, the grief curve, the kinds of emotions that people go through. This is an extremely emotional event. And it's emotional because the future is so hard to understand and so hard to nail down and so hard to tell people that it's going to return to normal because none of us really understands yet what normal looks like. So I think I put this up just because, like grief, like change, everyone goes through this curve. Everyone hits sooner or later every one of these areas. I think you need to understand where your folks are and you need to go where they are to get them and to talk to them in the place in which they're currently
And
residing.
I think one of the things to remember is that as a leader, we've got people to take care of, we've got a mission to continue, and in most every case, you've got customers or clients or people that you have to care for. And it's against the backdrop of their own impacts, what's going on in their home,
Yes.
what this impact looks like for them.
Exactly.
Very, very different. Very different.
Exactly. Very different. Very different. The second huge challenge was we all have some basic needs. We need food. We need people to care about. But one of those really primal needs is around safety and well-being. And that is what this pandemic really undermines when you think about it. It's our safety and our well-being. And for us to have 70% of our employees needed to come into work every single day, being able to address employee safety and well-being was paramount to us being able to continue to operate and be open for business. And in our world, excuse me, in our world, part of operating and being open was about getting healthcare workers to work, getting first responders and police to work, getting frontline people in transit to work. I mean, there's some getting the supply chain to help that keep moving in our ports. So very primal need to address well-being and safety in a way that was very different than we've ever experienced. As I said before, 70% of our staff are essential employees, 30% work remotely. We really had to do some interesting flexible staffing models in terms of staggering hours so that at the beginning, before there was a complete lockdown, we could make sure that people were able to social distance. We split teams into A and B teams very early on because very early in this pandemic, we would see that one person could potentially take out 50 people at a time who had been exposed and were then quarantined. And so we had to come up with innovative staffing plans that would really allow our essential people to come into work, but through staggered hours, flex staffing, and this kind of concept of splitting up teams, we could actually ensure that if people were exposed or if people did come down with the virus, that we still were able to maintain our essential operations.
I can only imagine that is a massively intricate planning process. I mean, when you think about the areas you need to cover, the lifeblood of a city, being able to get supplies in and out through some of the very things that your folks are in charge of. I mean, just the awesomeness of that is incredible. And I think, when you look at these teams and how they are on the front lines, like so many healthcare providers and a variety of other types of folks, what was on your mind in terms of early ways to support their health and well-being, for them to just not be unable to function and to be able to handle that kind of stress?
Yeah. So a lot of what we did, a lot of it was talking to them, and allowing them to really ask their specific questions. So when we did with the chief medical officer, when I did the departmental live informational meetings, there was no question that we didn't allow. They were not questions, most of them even about work necessarily. They were very much about keeping themselves and their family safe. So we talked a lot with people about, what do you do when you bring groceries into your home? How do you effectively disinfect everything that's coming into your home? How do you go out into the world and get supplies? How do you get to work each day in a way that makes you feel comfortable? Part of what we did here was we actually pulled our toll collectors out of the toll booths, and we went to all electronic tolling, because we wanted to create a safe experience, not only for the public, certainly, but for our employees as well. And it wasn't a safe experience for them to exchange money and have that kind of close contact for a sustained period of time with people. So we pulled our toll collectors out, and we created online learning sessions where we are actually upskilling them to do other kinds of jobs that we need done at the Port Authority. And so there are some silver linings in all of this as you start to address some of the concerns that employees have, and you start to see other opportunities that can make them feel more comfortable. We have a police force of about 2,200 police officers who are out and about. So it was about making sure that they felt comfortable responding to emergencies. We have tunnel and bridge agents, so that if there's a crash or a motor vehicle accident on our bridges or tunnels, that they felt comfortable being able to do their job, which is responding to an emergency, and still felt that they were protected and that they understood how to handle these situations in a way that helped them feel better about going home to their loved ones at the end of the day. We also spent, Rebecca, a lot of time talking about our employee assistance program. We have a 24/7 program. I'm sure many folks who are watching do. You cannot not talk about mental health and mental well-being when you're talking about this. There's so much fear, and there's so many times that our chief medical officer and I actually had to tell people we didn't know. We didn't know how to answer a question because there was so much unknown about this. And that's very, very hard. So our employee assistance programs, as I said, are available around the clock. We also have grief counselors available, because what we also found is, while our employees are doing very well in terms of fairly limited exposure and fairly limited numbers of cases of COVID-19 within the Port Authority, families, friends are being impacted significantly. We had one employee who talked to us about the fact that she lost 3 family members and had 2 others who had tested positive, including her dad, and needed help managing that, especially a lot around feeling isolated and alone, and work being sort of a lifeline for people, in this case, who are trying to manage through this crisis alone. So again, you can see some of the other things we've done here. I think some of the lessons learned: time pressure is extreme. Our decision making actually impacted people's lives in a very positive way. I think we minimized exposure. I think we minimized chances of people coming in contact with this as best we could, and we're seeing really good, profound results from that. I think it's about being really direct and truthful with people, even when that truthfulness is kind of ugly at times. And I think it's about reminding people that life will go on and that they have to find things to get them through. They have to sleep, they have to relax, they have to exercise, they have to laugh, they have to create, we've done a lot of work in our departments with virtual cocktail hours, ways that to come together as a group to not talk about anything, not to talk about work and not to talk about COVID, but just to have fun with each other. We've had a couple of babies born, which is a wonderful thing, and we've celebrated as many different things as we could.
No, I think that's so critically important because we are doing this against the backdrop of personal impact, but it's so important to sometimes have an opportunity just to connect. Not everyone is with their family. Some people have been sort of stranded in transit, if you were, or they live alone, or a variety of things. And just to stay connected, I think is very important. And I think the virtual happy hour is now a permanent part, perhaps, of American life. I have seen some very creative things that are done, but I want to touch on a couple of questions that came in during your overview so far. And I'll be brief, but one of the things that and I'm sure you're so close to this, can readily relate, but the absence or let's say an inadequate level of personal protective equipment in many cases. Someone asked how you were supporting your frontline folks in making sure that they felt comfortable and that they were protected so they could do their job. Could you speak to that a bit?
Sure. So, we have a lot of folks who are in maintenance areas, a lot of operational areas. So we have folks who, even through their regular course normal business, wear protective equipment. So they're accustomed to being able to do that. And while N95 masks are reserved for healthcare workers, we did have a very large stock of facial dust masks, surgical masks. We allowed very early on employees, before the CDC had kind of evolved into people wearing face masks as a normal part of work, we allowed our employees, if they wanted to feel comfortable to bring in their own, and or to as on a regular basis don the equipment that we had available, including face masks, gloves, goggles, things of that sort. So we actually we understood very, very quickly that people needed to feel comfortable. We have our own procurement department, so that helps in terms of trying to continue to get those kinds of supplies. We've advised and instructed our employees on how to wear them properly, how to use them properly. But we've done some other things too, because the protective equipment is very difficult to get, and we don't want to take it away from where it's needed most, which is healthcare workers. So we've done some other kinds of things that I thought were innovative. One being, we took the toll collectors out of the lanes, so we eliminated that interaction altogether. The other thing we've done is on our PATH trains, where we have conductors and engineers, our conductors and engineers used to ride in different cars. We put them in the same car, in a head car, and we closed off the head car to passengers so that just the conductor and the engineer are in the head car. They can feel safe with one another. They certainly don't have to worry about trying to maintain social distance. At the same time, we have made sure that our operations are running consistently enough that the public has the ability to social distance when they get on the PATH train. So we actually encourage the social distancing. We're running modified train schedules, but we are making sure that the public has the ability to get on a train if they need to go to work and be able to social distance themselves. So we're trying to come up with creative ways that have nothing to do with the protective equipment, because it is so hard. It is in such short supply.
And there are so many people who are able to shelter in place because of the jobs they have or the companies they work for. That is a luxury that not everyone has. And so some people, and we hope that they're very successful in getting in from their homes to healthcare facilities to keep the city moving. And I'm sure it's a great comfort that some sense of normalcy is the trains are running and, they can feel safe being on them. That's a huge piece of, I think, returning to this newest normal. I know you have some lessons learned you wanted to ask, and then maybe we'll take a few more questions. And
Sure. So just a couple of things. I think we've already begun. I'm sure many of you have, to think about what the newest normal is. I call it newest because it seems to change every 5 seconds. Just when you think you have a grip on something. We certainly want to protect the agency's economic health. We want to do that in a way that's responsible to the public. We want to do that in a way that takes the best care of our employees that we can, and I think they certainly appreciate that. We have a lot of pre-crisis priorities that we're trying to rebalance, trying to make sure that we start to socialize with people what our return to work strategies might look like, and capitalize. I think it's important to remember to capitalize on those things, those changes we've made in how we do business, and make sure we don't fall back to the old way of doing business. We've been forced into some things that actually are good practices, and we should remember those and hang on to those and not kind of try and recreate the old stuff that's been banging around for a couple of years. And just in terms of lessons learned, I think it's just make sure people are really clear about their mission and the values of the organization. I think it's most important to stay positive and persistent in the face of what's going on. There are some days that's really hard. There's some days I'm much better at it than other days. But I think it's a very important component to find the grains of positivity in what's happening out there or what's happening in your organization, and to start to create an optimistic future where you can. It's not everywhere, not everything. We certainly can't promise that everything is going to go back to exactly the way it was, but we are trying to, as I said, create that optimistic future for people so that they understand that what the work we have to do is important. They can feel good about it. They can feel proud about it. And, out of that was born that hashtag PA Strong, which came from an employee and has lit like wildfire around the organization.
Well, you make a good point. I think there's, all leaders and all of us have to strike that balance between being Pollyanna and being doom and gloom. And it's a sliding scale depending on the day, there's no question. But I think, you talk about your organization and how uniquely positioned they are to know that they will get through this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of resilience out there. It's a word, one of the things, the picture here is a picture of, on this slide, is a picture of the World Trade Center campus. And it's a picture of the survivor tree. So there's an arbor of trees out there. There's one tree that's different, and that is the survivor tree. And every spring, it is the very first tree that is in full bloom. And this is a picture of the tree from just a couple of days ago that we put out there as really being symbolic to the Port Authority and to much of New York and New Jersey about where we're going and the work we still have to do.
I've had the privilege of taking the tour, and what an incredible experience that is. I would recommend that for everyone. It's great. It's a great testament to your people and a great tribute to those lives who were lost. So, I've got a couple questions here, and maybe I could just share them with you, and we'll take a few before I go to the perhaps more mundane things, because what I'm reading here is how much people are loving hearing your story. So if you were to think of, I loved your comment early on at the beginning when you talked about the fact that, there was so much that was unknown. In some of these earlier disasters or crises points, you had the ability to have a better sense of just what you're dealing with earlier on, which helps obviously with planning and helping people settle into, okay, now we know what the problem is, now we know what the solution is going to be, and whatnot. So I think that's a great point here, because there are so many unknowns. There continue to be unknowns. We don't know when things will go to the newest normal or some semblance of what there was. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to some of the work that you and your colleagues may have done as the executive leadership team in terms of helping people balance the anxiety of the unknown with the surety of what needed to be done, right here and now?
Sure. I think some of what we learned over time, and I think some of what people learn in crisis, is there are a couple of tried and true methods. One of the things is talk about the present, be in the present as much as possible. So rather than, thinking about that anticipation of what might happen, let's just talk about today. Let's just talk about putting one foot in front of the other today. And let's talk about what's going to work today, what we know right now. And when you start focusing on, we know where we are. We have a plan for today. We're going to execute on that plan for today. People start gaining a little bit more of a sense of control, right? Because you're not trying to predict what's going to happen out there in the future. You're just talking about one foot in front of the other. And I think that that was really helpful. We have senior staff calls with our executive director and our chairman 3 times a week. And that 3 times a week, we thought at the beginning that was going to be too frequent. In fact, it's been really helpful in spreading very quickly amongst the senior team a sense of what we're doing well and what we can talk about with our own departments and our own folks, and a sense of just, again, control. It's all about control.
That's right. When you feel you can control the controllable, that's a huge uptick in how people start to frame what I have to do today. Yeah.
Right. And some of it, Rebecca, was about meeting people where they are today. So we had very early on, when we were doing these informational sessions, we had people asking all kinds of questions. Like, we had a woman who actually had read something on a blog, and she wanted to know if she could kill the coronavirus with a hairdryer. And this was her big question. Like, I think, I've read somewhere that we can do this. Is this real? And it sounds kind of funny, but she really believed or thought she had stumbled on something that was going to be helpful to her. And we had to say, not that easy. If it were that easy, we'd be Nobel Peace Prize winners. But people are really grasping for anything that feels solid, right, or predictable. And that's what you have to offer them as a leader, no matter how small that seems.
My favorite out of all this is the woman who asked whether or not Cheetos vodka could be made into hand sanitizer, and they had to actually respond that no, there wasn't enough alcohol content in there. And then they wanted to know, could it be a stomach sanitizer? So, I think people simply want to have more information, more data, and to be able to function. So, Mary Lee, I'm going to go to just a couple of things in the interest of the last few minutes, and we'll open it up again at the end for questions. So if that's all right with you, I'll encourage people to type some questions. I'll share just a little bit of some of the specific resources that I'd like folks to know that's out there, and then we'll come back to this. But thank you for sharing that incredible story. What an example of leadership from yourself and from the whole team, but from the impact that you have on America's largest city. So just incredible story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
It's very hard to even, top that story. I'm not even going to try, but I just want to show a couple of resources. And I want to mention that there are 7 reports up now that are available to you. Was just going to touch on the first 4 here. I'll just mention that this is what we have here. So many of our members were asking about compensation and benefit strategies. And so they also wanted to know about alternatives to layoff, or if you have to do layoffs, how compassionate can we be? And then also thinking about, our thoughts about a healthy workplace, whether that's distributed or virtual now. So let me just share just a couple things if I could, and then we'll come back to some of the questions that I see are coming in. So we're going to skip past the poll questions. This was about some of the compensation and benefit strategies. I'm not going to discuss all of them, these were specific to about helping employees through this. And a lot of it was around the creative things that our members are telling us around personal time off and sharing it, which is, you talk about times of crises and people stepping up to do things and take care of each other. So a lot on the personal time off. One of the things we're discovering is how, well, certainly we're discovering, some of you are experiencing it on this webcast, the limits of our infrastructure in terms of internet connection. And when you all of a sudden have all your children and your significant others and people you've just bonded with over years living in your home, all looking for bandwidth to try to go to school or to do their jobs or whatever, we're learning how important this is. We're also learning how important and dependent we are on childcare. So it's one thing to ask workers to work remotely where they can. I know that's not the case as often at the Port Authority, but what do we do when childcare is not available? And so we are seeing some organizations beginning to try to create partnerships with childcare organizations to support their large numbers of employees, but also, and I think we need to think differently about how we support people perhaps closer to the point of need. And the other thing is about recognition pay. You can't miss the signs, whether they're Google examples from today alone or from advertisements about how much we appreciate those who are on the front lines of doing. And how do we reward those people? How do we take care of them? Another one was on finding alternatives to layoffs, and these were just some of the findings. You have this entire deck to download, so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to do that. But a lot of it talked about temporary pay cuts, reducing some of the non-essential costs before you start to impact worker pay, about freezing those positions that are not essential or critical at the moment. There's a variety of things here. These are the things that commonly, as we as a profession look to do first, freezing merit increases, promotions, bonuses, that sort of thing, because at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is cut so far deeply into the bone that you can't come back from the eventual recovery, which will come. We just don't know just when. We don't know how exactly it will look, but we know it will come. And so having the talent that you need, particularly these last few years when we've had such a labor shortage, is critical. Another thing that we wanted to talk about was the opportunity for conducting layoffs. I think what's been gratifying, and certainly there are many things here, I'm sure all of our organizations, or we personally have been involved in determining what we would do during layoffs and providing employee assistance. What has been gratifying to see is that many large companies who perhaps were more competitive in the past have bonded together and trying to have sort of a labor exchange. You'll see several of them coming out, some of them being led by a couple of different firms in particular, and I don't want to mention any names, but there's a couple of them now that are consortiums. We're involved with one. But allowing people to say, I have these worker needs to handle the overflow. We need more call center people, or we need more people in the pharmacies, or we need whatever it is, and matching up the talent that is impacted at other organizations, even if it's temporary, and doing creative things like, I trust that if this was an employee of your organization, we're not going to need to do quite the background check. We're just going to roll with this. And making it possible to bring people into a different workforce, even if temporary, but almost immediately. And that, I think, speaks volumes about our willingness to help each other. And one other thing that I'll mention is, we're seeing, even in these times of crisis, sometimes when people are stressed, when people are fearful for themselves or their families, we need to remember that we have to be vigilant about making sure that every worker enjoys the same protections that we would afford them in the workplace simply because we must, and even if they are remote, it doesn't change a thing. So that, that speaks to a lot of what you talked about, Mary Lee, about being an inclusive leader, about listening, about being on these virtual calls and making sure that those folks who may be experiencing things very differently, we probably all know people who have been thought of differently, perhaps because they thought that they may have been part of the original location of this virus. There's a lot of things that we need to be careful about and vigilant about as leaders, and being an upstander, not a bystander. So I just want to mention that this is a nice rapid response report on that as well, and a lot of it has to do with just making sure that we understand the impact that is going to be felt differently by all of us, and all of us are going to be, I think, needing us to be thoughtful leaders and thoughtful colleagues as we go through this. So a couple of things. May I just ask if we could handle a couple more of these questions, and then we'll sort of, I think, move to closure here. So, Mary, if you're willing, several people have talked about,
Sure.
you know, the impact of this immediate crisis, and then the thoughts about getting back into the swing of things, the next normal. You know, as you look at this, you've mentioned that you don't think it will ever go back just the way it was. I think probably most of us would agree. But there are some things that maybe even already we can see will be different. And I wondered if there's a couple of things that you might be able to share that as you're thinking about re-engaging this workforce in whatever this next normal is, what would be the couple of things that you would think are going to be vitally different?
So I think for us on our front lines, I think we have taken a lot of measures to separate people, have the social distancing, create work schedules that limit exposure. On the management side, everyone's working remotely. Typically, we're not an organization that has a tremendous remote work population. So I think for us, getting back to the new normal in some cases will be having some number of people come back into the workplace. I guess I question in my mind how that will happen. Will we stagger people back into the workplace? One of the very key issues for employees who are working is they know they're okay. What about the other person? Are they coming in sick? Are they coming in with a fever? Do they have someone in their home they've been exposed to? How do you mitigate for that? Do you connect the turnstiles in an office building with a temperature camera that takes temperatures en masse? I mean, those are some of the things that we're trying to grapple with is how do we get our workforce back, and what number of them should realistically come back. We had a very comprehensive plan to wind down into the place we are now, and the wind up is going to be even, I think, more interesting. So, just things like that. How do we move 5,000 people on elevators in the World Trade Center? Just so many different questions. How do we move people through our airports, through the Port Authority bus terminal, through cars are easier to deal with. People feel a lot safer in cars. The end result of that is a lot more congestion in the city. So many patterns that have been disrupted that we're still trying to grapple with.
No, I've
Not
sure
sure
you, but I think right now, and that's why we're excited about putting together some of the questions for people to begin to think about, because if you say, all right, let's come back to work, well, okay, to your point, many people who are perhaps at risk or have concerns, or they live in a home where someone would be at risk, going into a workplace and then bringing that back. How do you do social distancing?
Right.
On a plant floor, in customer service roles? I mean, there's just no end to the number of questions. You could test negative one day,
yeah, and
be exposed, and then, you don't know. It's not like you're going to have a test every morning to decide whether or not you're going to go to work. So it's a very complicated, to your point, set of interconnected variables, because not only do you have your workers, but you also have the public, and using your vehicles or your, routes of transportation. So that's just an amazingly complex thing. But I do think it's time for us now to think about the questions, because it's easier to stop than it is to start again.
Definitely.
And we need to think through the unintended consequences.
Yes.
I have a question here. So many companies have been able to respond for their workers. And I think as a nation, we have not heard as many stories, and there are many excellent examples of companies who are trying to take care of their contingent workforce. But many of these folks have just sort of been jettisoned from the boat. And I think one of the things we need to think about as a nation is what are the ways in which we need to care for those folks also, because there are impacts right on the healthcare system and a variety of other things. But these are people that we need to think about a little differently. I wondered what portion, and forgive me for not knowing, of your larger workforce is contingent in nature.
So 8,000 are permanent employees. On top of that, our contingent workforce, primarily consultants, contractors, are around our large infrastructure projects. Infrastructure construction right now is still considered an essential service. So while we have certainly asked every department to look at their budgets and to control their costs, many of our projects in which we use contingent workers are still going forward as essential projects. So we've had the luxury, if you will, of being able to have work that we can continue to offer to our contingent workers. So we're in a little bit of a different place, I think, in that regard. Now, where we see certainly large numbers where life is very different is in our aviation business, where folks aren't flying, and so there are a lot of contingent workers in the airline business that do not work for the Port Authority but work at our facilities, and so we are while those businesses are open, those footprints geographically have been, terminals have consolidated together, airlines have consolidated their terminals. That's certainly a workforce that has been impacted. But the ones who are working directly on our construction projects or infrastructure projects, we're still trying to, in a safe way, trying to manage those projects.
No question. And I think we all want to get back, from an economic standpoint, but I think it's got to be such a difficult scenario to balance, because if you don't have people who feel comfortable coming back, you can say, come on back, and, it's not necessarily quite the picture that you had planned. Well, Mary Lee, I know this. I could talk to you for more hours, and I'm sure that you would enjoy that as much. But what a fascinating journey you have taken us on today, and thank you for that. Just for carving out time in the midst of this very, very busy time for you and your team. I greatly appreciate it, and I am sure that our participants today did as well. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone, and I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my team in HR who have really, pulled us through, working many long hours, as I'm sure a lot of folks on this call, their HR teams are working day in and day out. So find a random act of kindness to do for them, because they are really the backbone of all the things that I talked about here. Well, so thanks again.
Thank you. So many people on the chat box have said thank you, especially those of us who are in the New York area. Thank you. So as we close out, just a couple of things. I talked about, trying to get our heads wrapped around what are the right questions to ask for this planning to get back to work. We've got a short but important survey. We'd love to have you participate. You can see that it's hyperlinked. When you download the slides from this, please be sure to spend a few moments. We'd love your voice and your thoughts. I want to mention also that we will have part 2. We will have another colleague of our profession come and share their experience. Can't announce it yet, but we will shortly. So I hope you'll mark the day, because I think there's nothing more important than seeing what successful leaders in our space are doing to bring their teams and their companies through this crisis. So we'll have another one for you next month. We have a whole series of podcasts. I know that's the way a lot of us like to learn things, so I'd encourage you to see what's the newest and greatest there. And then finally, we always want to be better at what we do. You can just use my email there and let me know what it is that we can continue to do, or topics or people that we might want to help tell their stories. So with that, I'll close out and just thank you all for the work that you are doing. Before you drop off completely, if you could just do the webcast evaluation real quick. But thank you. There's probably no more important job right now than supporting the people who are the experts who are going to keep us safe and healthy. Thank you. Thanks again. Bye now.